Welcome to ABA On Call. Join myself, Rick Kubina. This is the maturing of our science that can be done, and Doug Kostewicz.
It is so powerful to be able to convey numbers rather than the subjective nature of words.
For thought-provoking conversation. Hey everybody, would you like to get a CEU for this episode? Listen closely for the announcement of 3 secret words delivered throughout the episode. Take note of those words and we will tell you where to go to get your CEU when the show is over. Hello everyone and welcome to ABA On Call. Doug, it's always a pleasure to see you. Today, we're going to this is fun when we do these reviews of articles out there. I enjoy them. We do them a few times a season. And this particular article is one that we'll link to in the show notes. And I hope all of our audience members have a chance to download this. You can download this for free. And it is an article that's called Breaking the Structuralist Barrier, subtitled Literacy and Numeracy with Fluency. And this is by Kent Johnson and Joe Lang. And this was published in a special issue. When Skinner died in the American Psychologist, they had many people that wrote articles about behavior analysis, about Skinner. And this was, I feel, just an incredible contribution. This was published back in 92, but it did an amazing job describing how Morningside and mostly Morningside, but also Malcolm X, which we'll talk about later, used this idea of Skinner's contribution to help create this, what I feel is probably one of the most advanced educational institutions that we have anywhere.
Yeah, and I think that this, even though it's going on, my goodness, is that 31 years?
Yeah.
Wow. So 31 years ago, this has as much meaning now as it did then. When we go into some of the aspects of what this article means, what it talks about in the techniques and the way they align instruction and education, it is as important for us now as it was then.
Easily. They call this article Breaking the Structuralist Barrier. And I suppose it'd be good if we spend this first section just talking about what are the differences between structuralism, selectionism. There's a quote here that is right underneath the abstract, and I'm just going to read it out because it's so fabulous, and it comes from Skinner. And Skinner says, structuralists and developmentalists tend to neglect selective contingencies in their search for causal principles in organization or growth. The proper recognition of the selection action of the environment will require a change in our conception of the origin of behavior, a change perhaps as extensive as that of our former conceptions of the origin of species. That statement, here's me making a gesture of my mind just being blown.
Definitely.
There's a pun there.
So I think structuralism, one of the big things, and Skinner talks about it many times, is that notion of these inner mental constructs for knowledge and these structures that we are addressing or trying to pull out of people. They're there and we need to get to it. And the notion that you really can't measure those, they're just not there, is one of the big differences between that notion of selectionism and the idea that our behaviors are selected by the environmental contingencies that then increase or decrease how we meet with the reinforcement contingencies that as we behave. So, I mean, the that big notion, selectionism versus structuralism, is inherent as we think about behavior analysis, psychology, education globally.
Yeah. In that quote, in what you're saying, Skinner talked about looking for causality.
Mhm.
It's hard to prove anything, and we don't tend to use those words in science because you could never prove
Right.
anything technically to 100%. But you can be pretty darn sure that something's highly probable. And if
Mhm.
you're okay with dealing with probabilities, then this science, at least it's always been attractive to me as I understand it. You have the two things. You have in what Skinner's talking about in causality, looking at if we just talk about natural selection in general, we're talking about this change it's basically dealing with change and
Mhm.
how do changes occur. And if we look at evolution and natural selection being a mechanism, which it's not survival of the fittest, which people think is people who are better or have there's this, you remember that thing that showed like uh it's the what do they call it, the march of progress, where at the end there's a man and at the beginning it goes from like a monkey to a bigger one or whatever. Like
Mhm.
you probably can imagine those. That's all. It's been debunked that this is what evolution is about. And I
Right.
feel that there's a lot of that in behavior analysis when we talk about selectionism, and we're talking about this, how things are selected are going to strengthen, which would increase the probability of something happening, or something that could diminish and reduce the probability of something happening. And all of that's weaved into our science. And this paper is looking at how do we do have many people in psychology that have this structuralist way of looking at things. How do they, it's not really saying all the things that they do in education, but how do we
Mhm.
understand this selective action, and how can we use that to create something in education that's going to be powerful and that's going to change people along a path of optimal growth.
I think that you want to take this a little bit further in saying that just because things are selected, that doesn't mean that they're the best path, that they're the best for the individual, that the person will continue to move through their life and just keep getting better. It's a combination. It's way more complicated than just the notion of going from good, better, best situation and selecting those. It's selecting based on your own history. You can select for very, if behaviors that are not going to help you as you move forward. They're not the best behaviors that are selected by the environment that you're in. So just because there's this notion that things are selected, it's a way of thinking about how these behaviors become established in repertoire. And I think as we move through the article and as we go into the other parts, we'll see the difference between just selecting and then someone using that notion of selecting and creating a better path for individuals targeting specific behaviors.
Yeah, I feel your comment opens up a rabbit hole that we could go down. When I was a baby behavior analyst, when I was just learning the craft, I
Hmm.
remember using the word maladaptive, and I was
Hmm.
corrected that you should never use that term because, like you said, behavior is about change. It's not about what's better or best or good. Those are just
Exactly.
labels that we put on it. Like, who is it really good for? If you're a teacher and you have a kid that's like, oh, call on me. And you're like, oh, well, that's disruptive. Well, who's it disruptive for? Is it disruptive for the students, the teacher, and so on? So you really have to look at this behavior and what we label differently. But I think that's very well said. And we're looking at change versus structuralism. when, we have many colleagues who just don't view the world the way that we do.
Mhm.
They don't have these unifying principles, and rather what they would look at, they would look into the person. It used to be feelings, it used to be the mind, and now it's moving to neurology. And there's always something else that's the causal agent, and people are not looking at the environment and the selective action that it has. So I think this is a really nice background,
Mhm.
and this article was written in a response to structuralism and to talk about, well, how that basic selective action, how do they use Skinner's gift to the world, all that work that he did, how do you use that to create an incredible educational method environment that's going to help people?
I think that brings us to our first word. And our first word is car.
Well done. That is our first word, and it is bringing us then to our second part, which, now that we've talked about what is selectionism, structuralism, giving you a background that started, let's just get into the Morningside model.
Mhm.
Morningside, this paper, not just straight up reinforce, it's just so much more than
Right.
that. And it talks about generative instruction, fluency. I could go on just talking about all sorts of things. But before I get into that, I want to know, Doug, when you read this paper, you're a longtime precision teacher. What
Mhm.
struck you? What jumped out at you? Was there anything new or surprising or something maybe you're like, oh yeah, I remember that from the past? What were your reactions when you were reading this older article about Morningside?
Well, I don't know that there was anything new or surprising. It was more just reminding and
Sure.
a different type of reinforcing, right? Not the true stuff, but just reinforcing the way I look at it, arranging effective educational contingencies and aligning those skills in such a way as to make the most effective gains for individuals. I mean, it just solidifies looking at how you align skills in a clear scope and sequence. You find out where that individual is within that scope and sequence. Find out the appropriate or not the appropriate, the critical core skills that are necessary. You teach, and then we'll talk about later, building those skills to high levels so that then they can, through both systematic, very clear opportunities, demonstrate those skills in different combinations, because that then allows that individual to interact with new situations, which is based on the bedrock of the previously learned important core element skills. I think that was pretty much what I got.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you. There were, at this point, this shouldn't be surprising since we read this many times. So
Mhm.
that was probably the wrong word to use, but
That's all
many,
right.
many things to remember, like
Mm-hmm.
things that were forgotten. And they do an incredible job of listing all of the people that have influenced their model. And almost everyone on this list is a behavior analyst and has had some work. Like they talk about Susan Markle, Phil Tiemann in terms of instructional design. They talk about Keller and Sherman's PSI, personal instruction. They talk about Lindsley in the standard acceleration chart. They talk about Houghton in tool skills. They talk about gold diamond, nonlinear instruction. They have all this. Ian and Epstein, who worked with Skinner and did work on generativity. There's just so much in here that when you look at all of it, and people are like, "Oh, what's the Morningside model?" It's not just this one thing. It's all of these things coming together, which is remarkable in its own sense, but I feel if you can embrace what they're talking about here, it can help you as an individual behavior analyst. Whatever you're doing, if you're in instruction and you're looking to build behaviors, understanding that it's never going to just be this one thing. A lot of people look for the magic bullet, and there's never going to be a magic bullet. When you do science, and especially when you're trying to put together this collection of many methods that's going to lead towards this superior outcome, that's complex,
Very
complicated, and understanding all of the different components that go into that can be exceptionally helpful for each individual when they see how, oh, maybe I could use this in a one-on-one setting. But together, all of this is astounding how it's come together. And
You said the word surprising as I'm thinking about the model. It's reminding me because I feel like we took this for granted, behavior analysis in education, quite a few years ago. And I feel like that link has slowly, less and less behavior analysis think of themselves as maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but they tend not to think in the academic settings as much. And it's reminding us that how very, very much behavior analysis has through, the contributions of the many names you mentioned, and also how it was aligned within the Morningside model. But, reminding us that we have these techniques, and it doesn't have to just be in education, but that it can be in education, that we're not relegated as behavior analysts just to those behaviors that people deem as disruptive for the individual. We need to change that. You can still use all these techniques for that type of thing, but you can also go straight at education as well. We're not just hidden out there.
yeah, this article not only describes the elements of the model, it also gives case studies of how effective it's been. And reading their results just gives me a feeling of pride that, I didn't accomplish this stuff, but this is something that I've done for many years. This is something I've studied many years. And even though I didn't do it, it's like, hey, this is this group that, collectively in one way or another we're involved with, and to see that they can do these things with behavioral technology, it just feels so good to like, yes, we can do this. And they talk about when they were working with adults that essentially, what was they were working for like maybe 2 hours a day. And I don't remember what this was off the top of my head, but was it a year for 60 hours, a year's worth of growth for 60 hours worth of instruction, or maybe
I was just going to say that. I remember, and I don't know if I was talking with or about Ken, but the idea that kids or adults who that notion of remediation, right? They're not gaining under the normal classroom contingencies. You need to go faster and do more efficiently than slowing things down for them. And the notion that when you align and use this technique, you make outstanding gains and begin to catch up and surpass your peers because of the effective alignment, the effective use of these techniques that we'll mention in a minute, but just thinking about the behaviors. So you have to go faster and do more to catch up. You can't keep going slow because then you're never going to catch up.
Yeah. That's one of the issues in special education. Students can get accommodations, and sure, get accommodation for you need more time on a test. However, that translates to some teachers thinking they need to slow things down and give people more time to process information. And that gets back to the structuralism that, well, their auditory processing or whatever is really slow. But you know what? Morningside has been working with students with learning disabilities, attention deficit disorder, all the people that some of my colleagues would say, no, they need more time because they have an auditory processing, but they do the exact opposite and their results are phenomenal. And then when you look at, well, what is the result? I mean, even from a practical sense, if you slow things down, how can you expect to catch up? But
Could never.
Yeah. And it
Could
is
never catch up.
very unfortunate.
And I still sense it's some kind of money back guarantee if I'm not misspeaking here, but I don't see that a lot in educational techniques.
Yeah. The money back guarantee is with Morningside, if you do not gain 2 years in your in a subject, then they will give you your money back guarantee. So at a minimum, you're gaining 2 years of growth. And of course, that's the minimum. Now you can get more than that.
Right.
And that's what you do. Morningside, I guess we'll get off the script a little bit. They don't talk about this in the article, but knowing where they are now, the whole purpose of the school is to have kids in there temporarily and get them back into public schools.
Yeah.
They're not like census driven and they're like, oh, well, we're going to get you and we're going to have you for the next 8, 9, 10 years. No, that would be considered a failure for them. They want to get students caught up and then, moving on and doing whatever it is.
But I think, it gets back to the model. It's not just caught up. It's that what skills are you missing? We're going to give you those skills. We'll catch you up. And then that puts you in a place where you can now interact with the other contingencies and maintain, right? You can maintain or excel rather than bring you to average. We'll send you back and let you go back down again. It's the idea of we fill in all those gaps. We bring you up. And then when we put you back up, you're in a much greater position to select for success or successful behaviors so that they're moving forward. So there is the selectionism side of things.
Well, Doug, with that comment, you brought us to our secret word.
Okay.
Which is rock.
Okay. So now now the third part, we were talking about the Morningside model. One of the core aspects of that model is the notion of frequency building. And in the old 30 words or less, how would you characterize frequency building, Rick?
Wow. 30 words or less.
Well, it can go all the way to 35. How's that sound?
Frequency building means, well, first off, you have to understand what the word frequency is. Behavior, every behavior that anybody does anywhere that has ever done, if you take a count over time, that's a frequency. People also call this rate. Scientists like to use the word frequency, so we use what is more popular in science. So there's a frequency, and you're simply building up frequencies. And the way that's done is you have to time a behavior. You have to engage in a repetition of a behavior, and there has to be some feedback at the end of that timing. And that process, that method of you're repeating something, it could be really fast, or it could be, it doesn't have to be super fast. A lot of people think you just go fast and that's frequency building. No, it could be a good pace, and it's timed. So you have to time it. And of course, giving feedback, because if all you do is you repeat something again and again, you could be practicing errors. So this notion of frequency building is you're going to keep building the frequency. And I guess if we added a fourth element to that, there's going to be some goal that you're moving towards. It's not random. It's not like, well, we're just going to keep doing this until you tire out or you plateau. So that is how I conceptualize and how Morningside would define frequency building.
And there are so many ways. I think some of the terms that are maybe that you didn't hit on, but I think are important is this is systematic, right? This is not just do something, get feedback and you're done or goal. This is a planned, systematic, deliberate practice, right? And usually that goal is not just a goal for you. It's not just a goal of the average of your peers. There's a goal there, but it has meaning when there is this, what we say goal, or dare I say performing standard, that when you get there, there are outcomes. So it's not just practice for the sake of practice, for getting fast and being accurate, like you said, getting feedback. There are other outcomes there that the research has shown. And thus why if you're reaching these performance standards, you get some outcomes. So do you want to hit those for me, or do you want me to keep going here?
Keep going.
Okay. So when you hit these performance standards, what we see is retention, meaning there's a certain amount of time later when you test again on that skill under those circumstances, you're very close to that performance standard, and you get better retention when you hit performance standard. Another one is endurance. You can demonstrate this skill at this rate for longer periods of time, and potentially in the face of distraction. There's a couple classrooms that I know of that would be great for kids to be able to demonstrate endurance, right? Then you get application. So this was one of the things that we were talking about within the Morningside model. When you align all these core skills and you use frequency building, right? You begin to make teaching these higher order skills go way faster because you have the bedrock, the core element skills built to these performance standards. So for example, single digit addition. If I have that one built to a performance standard, it will make other higher order math skills that involve addition, which most of them do, faster to teach. I may be able to interact with these contingencies quicker because notion of selectionism, but also it's firmly established in my repertoire. Thus the notion of when we remediate, we identify those skills, we use frequency, use frequency ability, and then begin to apply those skills in higher order skills. What did I miss?
Well, you said two things to unpack.
Okay.
One is if you get to fluency, there's these good outcomes that happen. One of them you said was retention. And that's just a term that we use to mean in the face of no practice, you're going to retain that information. The other thing that you were talking about, though, which also is discussed in this article, is that notion of like certain skills, if you get them to fluency, can also impact these other skills in, that's called different things. The element compound relationship, some people call it component composite relationship. In this article, they talk about tool skills. Mm-hmm. That's a precision teaching term. Tool skills means what are behaviors that are critical to many different skills that could be above it, built upon it. And if you teach those tool skills, then that's going to allow people in a curricular domain to just do it exceptionally well. And that, Morningside, that's been the bread and butter of Morningside for years. And you could apply this to anything. So all of our dear listeners, they could, if they're interested in doing frequency building, you have to identify, what is the sequence. If you want someone to be able to do this higher, more complex skills, the way to say it, what are the elements of that? And if you build frequency, sometimes you get these things for free. Sometimes you have to teach it, but it comes together much more quickly.
Yeah. And I think as you begin to identify the component, tool, skill, elements, whatever you want to call them, moving to the next level, understanding that it's not linear, but this compound skill may be a tool skill, something past that, or it may be more of a web approach of how are all of these skills interact, because a tool skill here may be two elements of two other compounds, which most of the time they are things that we do. So just using that notion, thinking about this relationship allows you to make effective use of your practice using frequency building. And when we talk about frequency building, this is not that drill kill approach. This is systematic, and it's also not hours and hours. When you've done frequency building, I mean, I can see spending on one skill 5 minutes a day, and you see amazing gains on that skill because you're being very effective. So think about how many tool skills would be working on. You can make efficient use of your time.
Yeah, well, and what you said just describes how Morningside creates these incredible results. If you took an instructional hour and let's just say you did 10 minutes or even 5 minutes of intensive frequency building versus, I remember an article, it wasn't shared in this article, but it was out of Juniper Gardens, and it was like opportunity to respond. And they looked at public schools and they saw how often are students actually being active. And it was like these schools that were very low performing. No, the students were almost having no opportunities. It was very disturbing, but yet, you put this information together and you understand why some schools, many schools, I shouldn't say some schools, many schools, the students just don't do very well because they're not engaged. And it's just the opposite of what we just talked about.
Yeah, it's almost often, it's almost a assess, teach, assess, missing that core component of practice and the idea that you will get this information, then let's see this information rather than practice that information systematically, practice those skills that are related to what is being instructed. So this is not in any way to get rid of instruction as a core component. It's enhancing, it's taking instruction, then come back to instruction of a new skill. It could go very fast if you have a real solid systematic alignment that I feel that frequency building is such a core component. You could really identify some core skills for almost anybody and do that.
Yeah. And one thing that we cannot ignore is all of the data that's produced by frequency building is put on a standard acceleration chart.
Yes.
As a teacher, then you could look at, you have standardization and you can see if someone's doing really well, if someone's not doing so well. And that is a core component that you have all this data. It's on these charts. You can just look at the learning rates, which we call acceleration, and that those frequencies across time actually give us that term acceleration.
I want to say one more thing. And so as people are maybe listening to this, maybe like, oh, well, education is this way, that way. There's a couple fields that have been doing this ever, and it's never in question. And they're just behaviors like, think about athletics and think about music, right? They break their skills down. They look at core tool skills. They get those skills so you think about basketball, if you can dribble and you can shoot really well, you put into a game, then all of a sudden there's these decisions, right? You're put in new situations and they select for a certain dribble that you already can do be very fluent at. And then I can shoot with both hands. I can shoot with all these things. So as I put into new situations, I can display the skill very quickly. And then we say they're amazing, but it was the alignment of all these core tool skills built to fluent levels. Same with chords and music and practice. And then I can interact with an unknown piece of music and be able to do it. So this is the same thing that Morningside model promotes as we think about using that, systematic approach. So it makes sense. And it's hard for not to make sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I feel, Doug, you and I could talk about this article and just keep going on, but unfortunately our time is almost
Yep.
to an end, so that would bring us to our last secret word, which is datebook. And with that last secret word, and with that, I would like to thank you all for joining Doug and I on ABA On Call.
Thanks for watching this episode of ABA On Call. To get your CEU, follow the link and instructions below the video. You can enjoy the program again there, or you can go straight to the attendance verification quiz. Just enter the secret words and pay the CEU fee to generate your certificate.